Okay, so good morning. In this lesson, we will be showing another example in calculating equivalent resistance. So we will be following the step-by-step procedure that has been presented in the previous lesson. So let's start. So this is example number 2. So we have to solve for the equivalent resistance or the total resistance of the circuit shown below. So let me draw the circuit. So in this particular circuit, it's a complicated connection of 8 resistances with values 9 ohm, 18 ohm, 9 ohm, 20 ohm, 5 ohm, 20 ohm, 1 ohm, and 2 ohms. So let's try to solve that particular example. So the solution, the first step is to of course copy the figure, and then once we have already copied the figure, we label the resistances. Importante that we label the resistances because pag kinol natin siya later on sa ating solution, mas madali na i-call siya with a number, no? Halimbawa R1, R2, etc. So in this case, we can just label it from R1 to R8. So pwede naman piliin nyo kung ano ang mga yan. So, for purposes of calculation, kopyahin muna natin. And then, next na gagawin natin is to identify the connections. So, ang pinakamalayo and the farthest resistance is the R8. However, we can observe that R8 is not necessarily in parallel or in series with R6, di ba? And also, it is not in series or parallel with R7. We can also see that. However, ibig sabihin, hindi natin pwede silang i-simplify agad. However, we can observe sa taas that R4 and R5 are actually in parallel. So makikita natin yan. And because they are in parallel, we can start with that. So the first thing that we have to do is to solve for the value of R45, where R45 is simply the parallel combination of R4 and R5. So we just have to substitute it based on the formula. So we have 20 ohms times 5 ohms over 20 plus 5. So makasasolve na natin ang R45. So that's 100 over 25 or a total of 4 ohms. So ngayon, nasolve na natin ang value ng R45. So we can redraw this particular circuit into a more, in a more simple circuit. So copy lang natin yan and then we just have to label R45. So now that we have R45, we can see that the combination of R4 and R5 is now in series with R8. So we can observe that. So since in series na siya, we can now calculate for the combination of that. We call it the R458, and it is simply the sum of R4 and R8. I mean R4, 5, and R8. Since R4, 5 is 4 and R8 is 1 ohm, then we can solve for R4, 5 being 5 ohms. So again, the next step would be to redraw. I-combine na natin si R4, 5, and R8. So we will just redraw it and then include the new resistance, the equivalent resistance of R4, 5, and 8 as such. And now, we can now observe that R4, 5, 8 is in direct parallel with R6. So since they are in parallel with each other, we can now calculate the value of their combination using parallel formula. So R4, 5, 6, 8 is simply R4 parallel R6 parallel with R4, 5, 8. So we will just follow the formula R6 times R4, 5, 8 over R6 plus R4, 5, 8. And then just substitute the value given 20 times 5 over 20 plus 5. Again, it is the value is 4 ohms. Okay, so 4 ohms. So now that we are done with R4, 5, 6, 8, we can further simplify our circuit. Okay, so kokopyahan lang ulit natin yung mga hindi pa nagalaw and then redraw the combination of R6, 4, 5, 8 or R4, 5, 6, 8. And then now, we can observe that it is now in series with R7. So as you notice now, hindi agad-agad mo makikita yon at the first version of our circuit. But as you move along, simplify 2 to 3 resistances at a time, then we can further simplify it. Now nakikita na natin that R7 is in series with R4, 5, 6, 8. So we can just calculate the combination. We call it R4 to 8. So it is simply the sum of R7 and R4, 5, 6, 8. So just substitute the values. 2 ohm is okay. Substitute the value of R7, which is equal to 2 ohm plus the value of R4, 5, 6, 8, which we have solved previously, which is equal to 4 ohms. Therefore, R4-8 is simply equal to 6 ohms. Okay, so now that we have solved this, we can continually the redrawing process. Once we have solved the value of R4-8, we just have to redraw it. And as you can see now in the figure, the value of, or the R2, the R3, and the R4-8 are actually connected in parallel. And since they are in parallel, we can simply use the formula for parallel. Since tatlo sila, we cannot use the formula for na R2, R3 all over R2 plus R3. So we will rather use the formula 1 over R2-8 is equal to 1 over R2 plus 1 over R3 plus 1 over R4-8. And now, all we have to do is to substitute the values given. So 1 over, that is 18 ohms, plus 1 over, we have 9 ohm, plus 1 over the 6 ohm that we have calculated a while ago. So therefore, we have 1 over R2-8. If you use your calculator, you can simplify the above equation to 1 over 3 ohms. So therefore, this is equal to R2-8 is equal to 3 ohms. So since we have already solved for that, we can further simplify this into just 3 equations. Okay. Now that we know that, we can simplify the equation. Dalawa na lang ang natitira. So R1 and then the combination of R2-8, which is now very obvious that are in series. So since they are in series, we can solve for the R total, which is also the R equivalent or the R between terminals A and B. So we have now R1 plus the combination of R2 to 8. And now just substitute the value, 9 plus 3, that is 12 ohms. So that is the value of our R total. In other words, the complicated circuit kanina can be substituted and the same ang effect sa ating circuit with a value of R total, which is equal to 12 ohms. So in summary, guys, we can just review. So ito yung original circuit natin. What we do is we look for the furthest resistances, but since the furthest resistances are not really in series or in parallel, we can find other alternative options. So that is R4 and 5. So we just have to calculate that, R4 and 5. And then pag na-calculate na natin ang R4, 5, makikita natin that it is now in series with R8. So we calculated that. And it is now in parallel with R6. Then we calculated that as well. And then it is now in parallel with, in series with R7. Then solve na natin ang 7 to 8 values. And 4 to 8 values. And after that, makikita natin that R4-8 is actually in parallel with R2 and R3. So we simplify that as well. And then finally, we have now the simple circuit, which is a series of R1 and the combination of R2-8 that lead to the final answer, which is 12 ohms. So here's my tip. Just make it sure that you do it 2 to 3 resistances at a time, depende sa connection. As long as meron kang series or parallel, execute that, redraw, and look for other opportunities for simplification. So thank you guys, and I hope that you have learned in this example. Okay, bye-bye. God bless.